Two, one. All right, we're live. Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz.com, a new podcast channel where we talk to thought leaders on property tech. I'm Ravi, a PropTech enthusiast, and I work in PropTech industry. And in this podcast, my motivation is to talk to CEOs, CXOs, and founders from PropTech companies all over the world and bring to you insights that are valuable to you. The website proptechbuzz.com today leads to the newsletter where I also share insights from the industry. And while doing that, show us some love by subscribing to us on YouTube here and on Spotify. The links are given in the description below. With that, I'm thrilled to have with me my first guest today. He is Nathan Brennen, who is the Chief Product Officer at RestB.ai. It's a disruptive company in many ways that is offering property intelligence through computer vision and AI. My goal today with Nathan would be to talk on two topics primarily. One is understanding the fundamentals of AVMs and how it is poised to shape up in the future. And the second one is to understand the role of quality and condition of properties in the AVM. So we learn both in the context of RestB.ai. And with that, let's welcome Nathan. Nathan, welcome to proptechbuzz.com. So privileged to have you as my first guest. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Ravi. It's great to be here.
So the privilege is mine, as I said. So Nathan, I know you are a technical guy. You have been with the organization since long. But for the benefit of the audience, the target audience that I have in mind, we'll keep this basic, we'll keep it foundational in layman's language so that a broader audience can understand this. But before we get into meatier stuff, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your role with RestB.ai?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as has been mentioned, my name is Nathan Brennen. I am currently the Chief Product Officer at RestB.ai. And for my entire professional career, the past 10 years or so, I've been focused on building AI products. My career started in the energy space with ABB building energy price forecasting tools. But more recently, I joined RestB about 4 years ago. And as Ravi's mentioned a little bit, we specialize in visual insights in the real estate space, which you can basically think of using AI to analyze property photos to understand and extract insights about a given property based on what the AI is able to see in those photos.
Excellent. And so you gave us an overview of what RESTB is, but what would be your value proposition? What is it that you're changing in the world which did not exist before?
Right. And I think when you look at real estate and you think about how you've interacted with real estate, whether you're looking for a flat or if you're looking to buy a new home, photos are one of the most important aspects of that decision. And in fact, we see a lot of studies that say photos are the most important aspect of a listing when a home buyer is looking to purchase a new property. So that sounds really important, but I think the reason for that is if you look at a photo, there's a wealth of things that you instantly notice in a way that you can't just looking at text. You understand, all right, what room am I looking at? What are the features that are present? Is it nice? Does its color scheme or layout really mesh with what I'm looking for? All of these things are very important, but very hard to structure in ways that can be used by models and algorithms. So what we want to do is say, all right, let's take all this valuable information that's unstructured that exists across all these properties and give that person who can learn a ton about a property by visiting in person, but do that for basically every property that's on the market all at once. We like to say, imagine you had a real estate expert that looked at every home in your market. What could you do with all that information? That's what we want to do with our AI and to provide that to everyone in the real estate space.
Got it. And what has been the maturity of say image based AI in the market today? Like how much has been the adoption and implementation in the real world?
So we launched as a company 7 years ago, really when computer vision as a technology wasn't necessarily in its infancy, but certainly from a adoption into the commercial space, it was in the early stages. This was around the time that the Googles of the world were starting with their more generalist models. What we quickly realized was that it's a cool technology. It's great to have, you pass a photo to an AI or to us, and we are able to tell you, all right, that's a living room. It's got hardwood floors. But a big challenge was saying, all right, well, what is the actual value in that information and how can I use that? So over this past 7 years, a lot of what we've been doing is saying, here are the specific problems that we're able to solve by having this information, and here's the value that you can get out of that. And like any new technology, there's an adoption curve where there's some early adopters who want to adopt that, while others are waiting to see, all right, what is the benefit of that technology? Now we're at an interesting point where, as we've moved into certain verticals, particularly the valuation space, there's been incredible adoption and reliance among several leading companies. But at the same time, because of how this industry works and the importance of unique data sets, it's not been talked about near as much as it's been adopted as a key component of valuation models. So I would say there's quite mature adoption by dozens of billion-plus-dollar companies at this point in time, but it's still a little bit under the radar because a lot of people see it as a secret component to their competitive edge over their competitors.
Got it. So what you are saying is today AVMs do not have images as an input parameters to come up with models. That is one. What other benefits or value one can derive out of images other than better valuation or more accurate valuation?
When we started as a company, we were more focused on the home discovery part of the process. So how can users, go to a portal and search for a property? One of our founders, the inspiration for this company was that he had just had a baby boy. His family was looking to move to a new home, and he really wanted a nice terrace in his next home. And there was no way to search for properties that had a terrace by looking at the photos of terraces. And that really frustrated him. So that's what started this journey. There's been a lot of experiences and things that we've built out with portals and enhancements to that property search experience, personalization of that experience based on what you as a user are looking at, because we now can understand what photos are you lingering on, what things do you want to see in that automated email that gets sent with a new property, what marketing material can we automate because we know exactly what's in each photo. There's a lot of things that you can do that are just maybe not in your face enhancements, but small tweaks and personalizations that can really drive conversions and can drive impact for anyone who touches property photos.
Got it. So it's a paradigm shift, right? Because early the status quo till now was you go to the filters, you look for a say address, you look for a pin code, you look for the number of rooms or something of that sort. So through those parameters, you would eventually get a list of matching properties. But never before was you could upload an image of a property and then have all the comparables based on that image. Am I right?
Correct. And I think that's actually a good way of thinking about why this is almost a different way of looking for properties. So when you search for properties now, you set a bunch of binary filters and you basically see what's left. But that's not that helpful if you don't really understand the market that you're searching in. Now imagine I've moved to a new city and I really want an industrial loft style home. I don't know where these exist. I don't know how much they cost. If I go ahead and put the size I want, the location, my budget, I really am not going to have a great idea about what it would take to get one of these properties. On the flip side, if I upload a photo of the style of home that I want and use AI, I can basically say, all right, here are where those properties are located within the city. Here is the price ranges that they're at. And it helps very early on in that, home search process, whether, all right, can I afford what I'm looking for? Does it exist in the area of the city that I want to live in? Basically, it's a great filter to understand where you want to spend your time in that home search process because you just understand that market much better and much, much more quickly than you would with traditional methods.
Excellent. And are there portals today that offer this functionality?
Yes. So we work with portals all over the world. There's some portals in New Zealand doing some cool things. There's some in the UK. There are a lot in the US experimenting with different, ways of doing this. it's hard to actually name all of them. And I think it's something that we're seeing accelerated adoption coming out of COVID as some of the markets cool down and people are looking to highlight their own portals in more unique ways.
Got it. So how does the interaction work? You are allowed to upload a photo of your choice, and then the search results are based on the matching photos. Is that how it is?
There's a lot of different ways that it can be implemented, but in a simple way, you're able to upload a photo. That
Mhm.
photo is then scanned and analyzed instantly across all of the active inventory in that market. And
Got it.
then it returns the 3, 5, 10 most similar listings based on what you've decided to look at. Looking at everything from the features, the aesthetic, the layout, the color, the style, the condition, the quality. There's a variety of aspects that you can configure it to focus on based on the experience you want to provide for your particular search site.
Got it. So you mentioned the first benefit is AVM accuracy. The second one is home discovery. Do you have more valuable use cases for images?
I think in just the overall data quality that you have on listings, this
Mhm.
obviously is relevant for AVMs, but I also think it's relevant for people that are searching for a home. We work primarily in the US, so we have 30 different markets or countries that we operate. The US is probably the leader in data quality with regards to just the data that's available for companies to build products and services off of. But even in the US, which you could look at as that leader in that space, when we analyze what's been populated by an agent for certain things such as, all right, does this property have, carpet or hardwood flooring? Does it have a beam ceiling? We're seeing that what's populated by the agent is, often 10% of the actual properties that may have that given feature. So by using AI to enhance and pre-populate or append these different features and components or attributes of these homes, you're able to create a much richer and complete data set that enables a lot of these search experiences that we're talking about, or these improved valuations, or even something like, in an appraisal process, decreasing the amount of time it takes to create that appraisal report because the features are automatically being pulled rather than an appraiser having to manually mark and identify everything that's within that home.
Thank you. So, as I said, the topic today is to understand the basics of AVMs. But since RestB does so many fascinating things, it's hard to not ask about everything that you do. Maybe you could summarize your other products or services or offerings other than photo-based AI. Maybe you could summarize that before we move to AVMs.
Okay. So, at our core, what we want to be able to do is analyze a photo and identify anything within it that a human or a real estate expert could be trained to identify. So this is what enables a lot of the things that we've previously spoken about, but other areas where this could be valuable would be things like content moderation. Can we make sure that there's no people in the photos of a listing? Can we make sure there's no improper watermarks? We can analyze to understand what are the duplicate properties, even if the photos are taken by different photographers of the same home. There's a multitude of things that can be done with this type of information, and it's really adapted to whatever is needed for that particular use case.
Got it. I'm just sharing your website. You have a bunch of solutions. So your solution says real estate image tagging, property condition, which I'm gonna ask in the second part of this conversation. Visual similarities. I think visual similarities would be the home discovery. Am I right?
Correct. So the uploading a photo and being able to search based on the contents of that photo.
Got it. And then it says image captions, photo compliance, automatic descriptions, watermark. Um, what would automatic descriptions mean?
Yeah. So we started really just focusing on what we could understand about a photo. But as we become more involved in this space, we've certainly been looking at what are the other data sets that exist that we can pull and layer into our data to basically provide more complete solutions. So automatic descriptions is an example of that. The idea here is that using what we can see in the photos, using what we know about a property based on, say its size, its beds, its baths, what we know about that particular location, we can actually generate the entire property description using
Nice.
something called NLP or natural language processing to help, accelerate how quickly properties can be listed, There's a lot of people who love writing their descriptions. There's a lot of people who say it's their least favorite part of the job. So within seconds, we can generate that full complete description for the agent to either use as a starting point for their own description or for them to hit publish and immediately get their listing live.
This is amazing, right? This is like pre-filling from your database, database. Sometimes so you add your address of this property, and you get all the property information as pre-filled. So what you are saying here is, from the image, you are able to generate descriptions for that property. At least it is. I mean, even if it is not accurate, it is helpful because you get at least something to start with, and reduces a lot of manual effort. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. And maybe one last one here. What does image captions mean?
So image captions is basically taking the same NLP technology where rather than describing the whole property in its entirety, focusing on the image and creating a human readable text for each image on your site. And the benefits of this are twofold. So one, most property listings are featured on multiple sites. And as such, when Google is looking to rank different sites, it's very difficult for it to understand how to rank one above the other. If you have these unique image captions that have all these different rich keyword text, then every single listing is going to have 10, 20, 30 unique data points for Google's crawlers to read that will then result in an SEO boost. So we see, increases in traffic from 20 to 40% just by putting these descriptions on the back end of your site. As well, these descriptions are what are used by screen readers when people who are visually impaired are navigating the internet. And it's something that can be very helpful for these users who actually have a really difficult time in the real estate space to search for properties because there are so many images, and typically there's not any text for the images at all, which means that there's nothing for their screen reader to catch on to. But even if there is, you'll see things like image 1, image 2, image 3, which is almost worse than having nothing because it's something that's nonsensical information for the purpose of what that alt text field that sits on each website is meant to be.
Excellent. Thank you for giving us an overview of RestB. This is fantastic. And how big is your team, if I may ask? How many people work for RestB?
We are about 37, I think.
Got it. And you're catering, and you're based out of Spain, but you're catering to customers all over the globe. Am I right?
Correct. So we are headquartered out of Spain. We also have a team in the US. The North American market, so the US and Canada, is probably about 60, 70% of our revenue. But then we have clients in Europe, in Asia, and South America. And we are very open to working with anyone who is interested in trying to use this AI to enhance their site, their processes, and to make things more efficient.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's now move on to the first topic that we wanted to learn from Nathan. Let's call it the AVM masterclass from Nathan. Nathan, so we use the term AVMs loosely. However, there are so many, the entire dynamics of AVMs, how AVMs function in the entire marketplace. There are so many competitors who offer AVMs, but I struggle to understand how does one AVM differentiate over others. So maybe what you could do is you could first explain what AVM is, and then help us understand how can an AVM provider have a sustainable advantage over other AVM provider. What is the differentiator there?
So I think I could probably talk for the rest of this call on this one question, but I'll try to keep it brief. So when we say AVM, what we mean is an automated valuation model. And the idea here is that you can predict the price of a property based on the different data points that you know about that property. And there's different methodologies for how this can be done, and there's different purposes that people use AVMs for. And I think that's important to understand when you're looking at how you would want to use it and whether it's right for you. So looking at the different purposes AVMs serve, a common thing we're seeing now is them to be used as lead generation tools. You'll see a site, it will say, hey, how much is my home worth? And ask you to type in your property address. It typically also asks for your email. They'll then use that to give you a price, which either makes you feel good or bad, and then have your email so they can follow up and reach out. These AVMs are much less focused on being as accurate as possible and more focused on, being lead funnels to get people to provide information. You then have what would be termed more investor grade AVMs. So in certain markets, you have what's called an iBuyer, or people who are looking to basically buy a home. Like, you give them your address and they tell you, all right, here's how much I'll pay for your home, without any more information. For these, obviously, they need to have the most accurate price possible because they are taking on a lot of risk by buying homes and deploying that type of capital. So there's AVMs that are looking to basically say, all right, how much is this home worth? You then have in the insurance space what you would call another type of AVM that's looking at not how much a home is worth, but what is the reconstruction cost of that property. So, you could spend a ton of money on a home, making it in a way that is not how people would want to buy it, and you can get that insured, and the insurer is not responsible for, providing the money for how much your home is worth, but rebuilding the home that you had that was insured. So these are all subtle differences, and a lot of these algorithms work similarly, but there are potential differences in how those are constructed and what they're focused on.
Got it. So the difference is the kind of use cases they offer. Say, for example, lead generator, I can understand they will have fewer input parameters. That's why the range might be way too wide, and not accurate. And it is intentional because you want to offer it for free for lead funnel. For investor grade and insurance, they both are meant to be accurate, but the difference is on the kind of input parameters the models take in. Am I right?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So again, and then the choices an end customer makes in deciding to go for an AVM depends upon what the needs are. Am I right? So for them to evaluate whether should I go to vendor one or vendor two for an AVM would depend upon what kind of explainability that vendor provides for their AVM, right? Could you explain how to make decisions between choosing between one vendor and other vendor for
It's
AVM?
Yeah, it really depends. You know, there's a couple metrics that AVMs track to basically say how good they are. We've also learned that I think almost every AVM provider that we talk to claims that they have the highest accuracy in their AVM. So when you're looking at accuracy, what does that mean? There's a couple metrics you may see. A common one is mean absolute error. So basically, what is the average percent off of a model based on all the properties that it looks at? Uh, this is very valuable to just say, all right, typically how close is this model? However, you'll quickly realize that, depending on a particular market, you're going to get varied performance on how good an AVM is. So it's really important to understand, all right, what's the average error of the AVM overall, but also what is that error typically in the market that I'm most concerned in. You then also have something called percent of properties within 10%, or PPE10. And this is basically saying, all right, of all the properties that we analyze, what percentage of these are within a 10% error? And this is important for particularly people that are maybe have a large collection of assets, and they want to make sure that they're not exposing themselves to a large risk by having properties that, may be very differently valued than what they are. So maybe your average error is a little bit higher, but you minimize the amount of big errors that you have in a model that focuses on that. So those are some of the different ways that you can actually look at how AVMs compare themselves. But it can also be very difficult because there's a really cool graphic that a company called AVM Metrics uses in the US. They are a company that basically benchmarks different AVMs against one another. And they have a graphic that shows on a map, which AVM was best going across time, and they do it on a quarterly basis. And you'll see that the top performing AVM is changing all the time. I think they said that out of 20 AVMs they reviewed, 17 different AVMs were the best AVM in a given market at some point over the past 2 years. And so, you're certainly looking not only at, all right, who's the best AVM based on this one study that's done, but, what does that consistency look like? What markets are they better in? Those all factor into what you ultimately want to use.
Got it. I think this is the one that you're mentioning about AVM
Correct.
metrics.
Correct. I don't know how to quickly get you to the GIF that I'm talking about, but I can
You-
pass it over to you, at least Ravi,
Sure.
after the
Yeah,
call.
you could add that in the newsletter maybe. Um, we're talking about deviation from the actual transaction. Am I right?
Correct.
Help me understand. This is somebody as an outsider. A transaction could also be a deviation, isn't it? A transaction. What does a transaction mean? Transaction could be uninformed transaction where somebody is maybe making a distress sale, which is he. I mean that might not be the actual value of the property, but maybe he does not know he made a bad decision and he sold the property for much lesser price than market value. Uh, when we say transaction value deviation, is it an average of transactions or it is based on individual transaction? How does it happen?
That's another good question, and there's certainly a little bit of gaming that can be done with the way these transactions are evaluated. On one hand, if you're looking at an AVM and what it's calculating the value at each property that exists, uh, that's great, but you have no ground truth until basically you have that sale. And
Yes.
unfortunately, before you have a sale, you have a list price. And so AVMs can actually incorporate that list price as an input into their calculation to basically minimize how far off they might be on whatever that deal may close at.
Right.
Um, you also have things like I mentioned iBuyers before. The stereotype of iBuyers is that they'll offer you lower value for your home for the convenience of being able to know that you can get a buyer within one day.
That's a very good
So
one. No? That's a very good one. Then they are not reflecting the actual transaction. They're reflecting a discounted transaction. Am I right?
correct, correct. And to handle that, there's something called only looking at properties that are sold at arm's length. So properties that don't that are between two buyers and aren't accounting for institutional or companies that are buying properties. And so that's how they filter out those values or those sales from being used in any type of analysis about the actual value of a home. But even still, there's always going to, on one hand, you have people say a home is worth whatever someone's willing to pay for it. But
Right.
on the other hand, you have what is that actual value? And it's not necessarily fixed, um, but it's something that you basically take the best you can with the data to make that analysis.
Got it. The emergence of AVM is to solve for scale. Am I right? Scale and the need for speed, because an AVM will never be able to match a physical appraiser on site. Am I right? Because the more I talk to people, there are uh, manual individual appraisers who go to the property, look and make an audit of the entire property, appraise the property. They will always have better valuation than valuation models. What my valuation models give you is they do it in scale, because human intervention and doing physically one after another is never going to make this scalable. Am I right with my analysis there?
Right. So the trade-off with an AVM versus a in-person appraisal is the speed, cost, and convenience.
Right.
Already in many markets, there's a shortage of appraisers, and you even see legislation going into place to say, all right, where are there cases where we can actually avoid having an appraiser because we have confidence that an AVM can be, accurate enough for basically the lender or say a mortgage lender to cover their risk. And so it's certainly, not meant to basically replace an appraiser, but it's meant to complement the different cases where maybe you don't need an in-person appraiser to do that particular evaluation.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you so much. Um, my next question was I was reading CoreLogic's AVM description, and it said the most significant factor for valuation accuracy is the number of recent home sales in the area and how similar the property is to surrounding area properties. Um, quite a handful at that. Maybe could you break that down and simplify it? Did it make sense?
Yes, and it sounds a lot more complex than it is, but I actually think that this rise of iBuyers, particularly in the US, actually does a great job of kind of explaining what this means. So The markets that most iBuyers enter first are always the same. Obviously, I know a lot of people listening may not be familiar with the US's geography, but it's typically, say, Phoenix, Arizona, Atlanta, Georgia, Texas, Florida. And it's a lot of these places that basically are younger areas of the country. So a lot of the population growth in those places happened more recently. And a lot of that has been developed with, say, neighborhoods or planned developments where all the homes are very similar. So with an AVM, it's a lot easier for it to understand that, all right, in this market, over the past 3 months, there is 10 properties sold. They're all approximately the same size, the same age, and in the same area. So, if you look at the biggest drivers of price in a home, it's size, um, location, quality, and condition. So if you know a lot of these properties are built at the same time, that means that their condition is probably in a similar place. If they're built in planned developments, that means their quality is very similar across those different areas. Their size is going to be similar, and the location is similar. So you can get very, very high performing AVMs when you have all these things that are similar. If you go to, say, the northeast of the US, where you have a lot of older homes, a lot more different styles, you have renovations that have happened at different times that you don't have track of, here it's going to be a lot harder for that AVM to be accurate because there's so many more unknowns or gaps in the data that you can't account for.
Got it. So there is no advantage for scale and volume to an AVM, and maybe the advantage would be how local the AVM is, and how similar are the properties. Am I right? Because if I say that, okay, I have these many properties, these many million properties across a country, it's not helpful, because maybe you need geographical view, a local geographical view, to be more accurate. Am I right there?
So there's two parts of that question. One, using particular data in particular markets can make the AVM more accurate in that particular market, but any type of AVM that's built on top of machine learning now is actually going to take into account and weight the way that they do prices differently based on different regions, based on how it understands that data to interact with the price. So that's being done even on nationwide AVM models. Though for sure, if you only focused on optimizing for one particular market, then you could create a model that would work better. But obviously, that's hard to scale and create models for every market that exists. The second thing is, I think, a little bit of what you're getting at, where if I just throw more and more data into this model, will I get a better model?
Right.
And that's where I think you have to be very careful, because any nationwide data set that you get, and this is, I think, even more true in a lot of other countries, is not going to be perfectly clean data. And when working with AI or working with data in general, they say garbage in, garbage out. So it's great if I have data, and there are data sets that say, this or that about different homes. But if 20% of that data is wrong, it doesn't matter if I get more of it, because there's these gaps that aren't explained by the data that are reflected in the price. So I think rather than having more data, it's much more important to say, how can I get higher quality data or cleaner data for a lot of the things that we're already incorporating into these models.
But quality will not help if they are geographically different, right? So, for example, one state can completely differ in the kind of properties than other states, right? So if
Correct.
you have an overall country's data, it's not going to be helpful. I mean, it looks good on your marketing slide where you say that, okay, we have these many million properties in our AVMs. But is that actually making your AVM better if it is not a local?
So I think it's always a trade-off. You could always have a better market that's a better model that's focused on a single city, but there's a limit on how much you can sell a single model in a single city, and that limits the amount of resources you can put into improving that model. And there are certainly benefits to a model that do scale across whatever market you're looking at. So I think it's one of those, yes, looking in one part of the country that has completely different housing to another part, what the model optimizes for in each of those markets may be different, but there are more high level things that can be beneficial when creating a model at scale.
Got it. I'm sharing core logic's differentiation, not to. The reason I'm sharing these examples is to learn, not to name a certain player here, but just to learn from these examples. So what core logic says, so they came up with a new AVM, and they called it the total home value, and they say their differentiation is property database of 5.5 billion plus records. When they talk about records, they are talking about properties or data sets.
So in the US, there's about 150 million property parcels. So that's not talking about unique properties when it says 5.5 billion plus records. I'm not quite sure exactly what that number means, but I do think with CoreLogic being, one of, if not the leading data provider in the real estate space in the US,
Right.
one of the things they benefit from is having just access to more data. I talked about the US being more mature in some of these valuation use cases because there is the ability to get access to data sets that doesn't exist in other markets. But at the same time, there are a lot of companies that, through their history or whatever it may be, have a lot of data that other companies don't. And that data, if used correctly, can help give them an edge that is very hard to overcome. But it certainly is important as far as what data that is. And I think that in other countries, Ravi, there's a lot of companies that hold a lot of unique data, and I think it actually gives them a much, much stronger advantage than I imagine CoreLogic would have in the US with its larger data set.
Got it. So help me understand. Okay, maybe suppose you are a consultant and I am an AVM provider, and I come to you and I ask you, hey, how can you help me differentiate my AVM and make myself competitive in the marketplace? What would be your answer there?
So it's a tough question because there's a lot of different components there of, all right, say you build the best AVM in the world, do you actually have the ability to sell? Can you go to the largest banks in your country and get a meeting with them and have them be willing to purchase from you as a startup? So I think
Hmm.
it's important to understand, all right, even if you have this incredible valuation model, who is your end customer that you're trying to sell it to?
Hmm.
And are you going to be able to get into those conversations?
Right.
But if you're just saying, all right, I want to build this best model, I think it's really important to, not try to beat the larger players at their own game, but to say, all right, what can I do that's maybe different than these companies that have more data and are really relying on just the fact that they have more data to build better models. And what we've seen and a lot of the people that we speak with is a lot of people that are maybe coming from a background in, fix and flipping, or coming in from backgrounds where they have a lot of, really, kind of street level knowledge about how to identify good value in properties. And then taking a lot of what they've learned there that is not based on this massive amount of data, but it's based on some more abstract things that can then be extrapolated and used, and trying to say, all right, they may have more data, but the data that I'm using or that I'm prioritizing my model is more effective or impactful. And it allows me to get an advantage, maybe not nationwide, but at least in the markets that I play in.
Got it. So let's take an example. Okay, I'm an AVM provider and I do not take image quality as an input parameter to a AVM model. All right. Now let's talk about RestB. You are also offering your models to AVM providers, right? Could you help us understand how does that relationship work out? Like, is it something that you can take from your inputs, and add it to my AVMs and make it wholesome? How does it work out?
Correct. So AVMs are some of our largest clients, where they basically purchase both our condition and quality data as well as other feature data or style data that we have that doesn't exist in a standardized nationwide data set. Or if it does, it's not well populated, cleanly populated, and they can use us to basically have a standard, well-structured data set that can be plugged into their model. I think I touched on this before, but imagine you have an AVM that's looking at 100 different data points. The first most important data point in that home's value is going to be location, but condition and quality, based on the partners we work with, are both in the top 5. So these are incredibly important things that don't exist at scale in a way that's really usable. You have some weird ways that companies try to create proxies to understand a home's condition or quality. Some companies will look to parse the listing descriptions and look for words that are, like recently renovated or luxury or, with lots of potential, and basically try to take all those descriptors to adjust a home score up or down. You also have homes or companies that are looking at, appraisal documents where there is typically a condition and a quality score. But the challenges with these methods is that they're quite inconsistent. They're not as granular as what we can provide with this computer-generated values, and they're not near as consistent because even with an appraiser, which can be one of the best ways to evaluate a home, it's hard to get 1,000+ different appraisers to all agree on the same scores in a way that you can, maybe not have a better score with AI, but you can certainly have a more consistent, you can have a more granular, you can focus on, what's the interior score, what's the exterior score, what's the kitchen score, in a way that with the appraisal ratings, they're all at the property level. So it's very hard to understand how all those scores are blended at scale when you're building that into a model.
Right. So how do you, so for example, I'm an AVM provider. I do not have image quality as an input for my AVM. Okay, we do not account for that. How do you complement us? What do you offer us, and how does it work out technically?
Right. So I guess what I was getting at is it's not so much image quality being what's relevant. It's just having a consistent score about the quality of a home, which is what you can provide in a consistent way using images. The way that you would work with us is basically we have an API that you'd be able to pass your images to, and we'd be able to return the scores for you to plug those in for all of your properties. And you could do that on an ongoing basis. And those scores would then be leveraged as any other data point into your model.
Got it. And it is as simple as that, because do you need to understand how a certain AVM is modeled for you to work better, or it is completely, the interfaces are completely disjointed with the underlying models?
So there's two main ways that we see. One is the approach of building an AVM where you're looking at X number of different data points and running a machine learning algorithm over those to determine the relative impact of each on the price of a home to spit out a value. And in that case, it would work as I just described. The other way we see is looking at the comparables, so looking at the recently sold homes in a given market and saying, all right, the similar properties in this market that have been recently sold for this much, adjusting for things like differences in square footage, differences in lot size, et cetera. How can we basically adjust based on the recently sold homes to determine what the price of this home would need to be? And this, it's very similar. We can basically provide in certain markets those comparables as well and adjust for the relevant features or differences between those properties to spit out, all right, here are the adjusted values of all the homes that have been sold. That could be indicative of the property that you're looking at's value. So you could have a comparable approach or just more of a 100+ attribute model.
And how does the commercial work out? Is it based on the number of images we provide, or is it subscription based? I'm a little curious to know about that.
So it would be based on a monthly subscription license, either looking at the amount of properties that you're looking at, less so the images, more at the properties, because the property is ultimately what's important to you. And that would obviously be on a per use on a property basis, or say you're going nationwide, there'd be a nationwide fee that would you could pay to get access to all the properties nationwide.
No, but for you to come up with the score, you need the images, right?
Correct.
So
but imagine that you're passing, we know how many images that is in, say, the US at least. So rather than you saying, all right, here's exactly how many images or properties I'm going to pass, we just say, cool, here we'll process basically everything that you have for this entire market for this price.
But what if the properties do not have the images? How do you get the images? I'm just asking some dumb questions because I'm trying to understand how this works out. Okay, so I pass you, say, 1,000 properties, and maybe there are some 50% of those properties which do not have accurate images, or maybe scraped images. How do you work on them?
So in this case, we're always looking at partnering with different partners who may have access to these images, to where we can basically generate the scores tied to a property identifier, and then be able to return that for that given market. So at some point we have to have the images and the acceptable use to do to basically return that. And that's something that is built out in some markets, and something that we're certainly looking to build out in more markets to help support the people who don't have the images, as you've mentioned.
Got it. So before we move into quality and condition, I just wanted to understand also one aspect on. So I was looking at your interview that you had with what it was not core logic, it was location logic, right? Local logic.
Local logic, yes.
Yes. So that was quite fascinating, very insightful interview, and the person from local logic mentioned that for the input parameters for an AVM is usually a 50-50 split between the property inside the four walls and outside the four walls. So the location aspect and the property aspect, both together, because it's always contextual, right? A property is always in the context of the location. Both contribute to the value of the property. What are your thoughts there? Is it, do you think it's a 50-50, or because you mentioned top five, because it again, what the way I understand is there are players who already know what are their priorities. So for some of them, their priority is condition and quality more than location. So does it vary in case to case?
So I would say that certainly if we look at like an institutional investor, they have something that's called a buy box, which is, all right, we only want properties that meet this criteria. But at the end of the day, there's always a price for that home. And that price for the home is going to, you know, not necessarily depend on what's important to them, but depend on what's important to the market at large. And they may, pay more than the market at large, or they may value things more, value things less based on, their own criteria.
Got
But
it.
that doesn't necessarily impact the market determined price of that home in the same way. Um, so that's kind of how I would look at that. I think for your second question about, is it a 50-50 split between the inside and the outside of a home, which I think was the way we talked about the difference between location and the actual structural components of the home.
Right.
And this is where it really depends on what you mean by that. Location has the largest impact on the price of a home, compared to any other data point. I think in California, it's crazy. You can get like a shack and it's going to cost you at least $1 million, just because of the price of that land. But I think what Local Logic has done a really good job of is trying to quantify other things about a home. So, how close is a particular location to good restaurants, to good shopping? How safe is it from potential environmental disasters? All of these things are relevant, but I don't think they're as well incorporated into valuation models today as they potentially could be. And part of that's because you have the address or the location of the home already. So that the location benefits of a single property are not going to vary drastically from the other properties around it.
Right.
And I do think that has an impact, and I do think that's what they've done a great job of trying to quantify to help people understand that, even something as simple as, all right, if you're the home in the beginning of a neighborhood versus the home, at the back of a neighborhood, that may be a 5-minute drive both ways every time you leave your house.
Right.
That is relevant, even though you would seemingly say, okay, these homes are in the same neighborhood, we can treat their location as the same. It is hard to put a price on, what is that worth? And I think that price varies from person to person.
Got it. So given location is, if you're comparing between the two, if location is constant, then it becomes all the more important about the property, isn't it?
Correct.
One last question before we move from AVMs is, I have seen there are AVM providers who provide different flavors of AVMs. Do you see this as a common theme? Like, because you might not have a single AVM that is one size fits all, or all purpose AVMs. Do you see this becoming more and more common? I'm just giving an example here where there is a total home value for consumers, for marketing, for originations, for risk management and portfolio monitoring. Is this becoming more and more common for AVM providers to come up with different flavors?
I have seen this, and I think it's a couple of things. So one, I think in this document that you just put up, if you look at the AVM for marketing, it talks about it having the highest hit rate. So hit rate refers to the amount of properties that exist in a market that it can provide a valuation for. Since marketing is probably the least, has the lowest need for accuracy, you can provide a value for every home more easily than you would want to for a loan originator who will probably be quite upset with you if you tell them a home's worth something, and then someone defaults and they realize that that home's worth a lot less than what your AVM said. So there's some things that you can tweak to differ the values that are pushed out by an AVM. I think this also is a way to basically provide AVMs at different price points, because one of the things you see is that a consumer who's looking to know how much their home's worth often only wants to pay with giving you their email in order to get a value for their home, whereas a loan originator is going to be willing to pay much, much more to basically be able to calculate the risk they have on their portfolio of assets. So by creating these different AVMs, you are able to create different price points that you have. I think the other thing that's not directly answering your question, but is quite interesting, and once again, I think this may be more specific to the US just due to the number of AVM providers that are there, but a lot of companies purchase AVMs from multiple providers. And then they do some, combination of blending those scores or, prioritizing certain scores based on the market that they feel that AVM is more strong in. So, that just points to the fact that depending on the value that you get out of a given AVM, it may not be a matter of just picking the best one, but actually picking more just so you can have a better understanding of your potential risk with whatever, purpose your company focuses on.
Got it. Yeah. So I'm aware of players who usually invest in multiple AVMs for multiple perspectives to have a well-rounded view. Excellent. I'll move to quality and condition. I have a few there so that I don't take a lot of your time here. My question to you is, what is the role of quality and condition of properties in AVMs? I'm primarily interested in the status quo without you as an actor. How is quality and condition being fed today to the AVM, and how is photo-based AI disrupting this space?
Right. So I touched on this a little bit where everybody knows that quality and condition are big blind spots in AVMs, or at least people who work with AVMs understand that this is a big opportunity to, um, you know, improve things. And uh, people are trying to get this data in different ways. So you have people parsing the listing descriptions, as I mentioned, or trying to look at the appraisals that have been done to understand, all right, what is the different scores that are relevant. Because even if that data that they're getting is not perfect, it's enough to move the model in a good enough way. I think from a more practical point of view, let's imagine that we're living in an apartment building that's 10 years old. One of those units has been used as an Airbnb nonstop over the past 10 years, whereas the other one has been, used as a sparing vacation home for someone who maybe visits a few times a year. The degradation of something that's used heavily is going to be greater and result in things needing to be replaced much sooner than the other home. Or even in the case of, all right, let's imagine that after 5 years in that same building, someone decided to renovate everything and put in, upgraded appliances, upgraded flooring. All of these things are relevant and have a actual cost value difference between, the other homes. So I mentioned that because another common thing is to try to use, say, the neighborhood or the area that a particular home is in as a proxy and say that, yes, we know that 80% of the homes in this area are about the same condition.
Right.
Always great until it isn't, because when it's not correct, that home is going to be missing not by a little bit, but by a lot on the valuation generated by the AVM.
Got it. Excellent. I'm just reading from your website, and you say, while AVM accuracy has greatly improved over time, they still feature a glaring blind spot. How can these models reliably understand a property's quality and condition? Has a property been meticulously maintained or experienced severe wear and tear? Is the property made of builder grade materials or with high end finishes? While these insights may be readily apparent when looking at a property, there has not been a way to efficiently provide these details to AVMs until now. Our proprietary condition and quality scoring models allow you to apply a consistent and standardized score across every property in your model. And this is what happens with when we give you the property information and the images. You come up with a scoring models that makes quality and condition scores even more accurate. Am I right?
Correct.
Excellent. I think I've run out of all my questions. I think AVM was the meatiest part, and some of those moments and answers were aha moments for me. So thank you for explaining them to us, and sort of a masterclass for AVMs. So Nathan, are there any other use cases that comes to your mind that we might not have spoken yet?
So I think the one thing that we haven't touched on directly, but it's also been a pretty recent development we've been seeing, is the impact of valuations or AVMs in the renovation space. So there's a lot of companies that we've seen in the US and in some other markets. Some examples are Plunk, Revive, Curbio, that are focused on unlocking value in a home through renovation. And you can think of that as, all right, if I'm going to put $50,000 into a home, am I going to get $70,000 out, or am I going to get $200,000 out? And this is something that you can do by looking at, what is the most relevant thing to add to a particular home given its particular location, size, etc. And so this is basically a combination of how AVMs work now to understand, all right, a home at this quality and this market would be more valuable than taking another home, say, 3 miles down the road and doing that exact same renovation, because using that AVM and looking at its pre-renovation state and post-renovation state, you can see that delta in value that would exist.
Are you already working on this space, on renovation space, and how is it?
Yes, so that's an area we work quite heavily, and what we do there is basically look at the comparable properties in a given market. So comparable properties would be the properties that have been recently sold that are similar to the property that you're looking at.
Right.
And then we apply our condition and quality models to both the original property or your seed property and the comparable properties, and say, all right, hey, the property you're looking at is in poor condition. Here are the other properties that have been sold that are in poor condition. Let's say that they all were sold at around $150,000. But if you were to do the work to make this property in good condition or excellent condition, we can look at the properties recently sold that are like that, and we see that they're selling for $350,000. That it's only going to take about $50,000 to renovate that home. This is going to be a good investment. And now imagine that you're not just looking at that one property, but you're looking at, say, 100 properties in a given market and seeing, all right, what would that potential delta or lift in value I could get. And in this case, you can prioritize, hey, let's look at the 10 that look most promising. I can still add that human touch and make that final decision. But now, rather than looking at 100 potential opportunities, I'm only looking at those 10.
Just curious, where do you get these properties with renovation data? Is this something that is available in public, or this is you source it from your own network? How does it work out?
So, the way that the companies that we work with operate in the space, you have two. So you have some that are what would be called fix and flippers, where they're actually trying to source properties to basically purchase and do these renovations on. Whereas others are saying, hey, you as the homeowner, you're about to sell your home. Let me help come in and do renovations to your home, and we'll unlock all this value in your home to help make you more money, while of course providing a service fee to the company that is working with that user. For the companies that are doing the investments, oftentimes they're looking at off-market homes, and there's a lot of different ways that you can acquire these homes by looking for short sales, looking for foreclosures, and different things like that. We even work with some companies to analyze street view photos to basically determine, hey, what properties look worn down that you might want to reach out to and make an offer on. So there's a variety of methods to basically find these different opportunities.
Excellent, interesting. However, I did not find the renovation use case on your website. Is this something that you have not yet begun promoting?
Yes, we have several live clients that are doing that, and it's been very successful. We are planning a launch more officially on the website in Q3, so later this quarter. We basically wanted to make sure that everything worked as expected, and we've been super happy with those results so far.
Excellent, Nathan. Nice to know about that as well. Renovation is a huge potential, especially in property tech, and nice to see Rest RestB making strides there. So with that, Nathan, again, thank you so much for your time and giving us on a late in the day. This is quite appreciated. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Ravi. It was a lot of fun talking about everything.